Well, speaking of degenerating intellectual culture, let's do just a minute on the free speech controversy of the week, which happened since the New York Times published this editorial yesterday. They put it online before, but it was in yesterday's newspaper. America has a free speech problem, which I have to say, I saw like 4 days of Twitter discourse about it before I actually read it. And so I was prepared for the article to be a lot worse than it was. The article was mostly fine. Like the superficially reasonable sounding criticism that I heard was that it equated sort of, attempts to disrupt speakers and kind of grassroots things like that with these book burning kinds of laws about CRT and other things that have been pushed forward by Republican state legislatures. And if they were equating those, that would actually be bad. But it doesn't actually seem like they were equating them in the article. I read it, and they did bring up both of them, but they clearly said the second one was worse. So maybe you could still say there wasn't enough emphasis on how much worse it was. But there are things in the editorial that were sloppily worded and unclear. And there's definitely stuff you can nitpick. Some of the poll questions they were making a big deal of were poorly worded questions. Like there are. I'm not saying it should be above criticism, but overall, the editorial felt to me like pretty boilerplate defense of the importance of free speech. And that seems to me like something that the left should be 1,000% behind. That for a variety of reasons. I mean, I think both principled and strategic, and having to do with the dynamics of actually trying to persuade people and achieve power, where we're going up against deeply vested interests that oppose us, to the fact that the entire idea of the kind of society that we're trying to achieve is one in which definitionally involves, like, if you think of socialism not just as state ownership, but as the extension of democracy to the economy, like the C.L.R. James line, right? Every cook can govern. Then that means that you trust people more, to have more input over what goes on in their lives and society as a whole than they're trusted right now. And if you don't, I've never understood how reconciled in anyone's mind with this kind of hall monitor-ish liberalism that like really focuses on trying to make sure that nobody has access to any bad views because we don't trust them to make up their minds for themselves, right? I mean, if you don't trust people to make up their minds for themselves, then you don't actually think that every cook can govern, right? You think, whatever technocrat, gets to decide what information people could get, should, that they should govern, is my view about it. I do want to throw to you guys, but first I did just want to say, I found, I was looking for things that I could play on this, and I found a clip that I'd almost forgotten about from 2 years ago. So this is our late friend Michael Brooks interviewing Noam Chomsky about exactly this topic.
But two other things I want to cover with you first is something of a kind of new outbreak of a debate over speech and the left. And it's written by, there was a very, I think, in fact, a very good, but very provocative Matt Taibbi article dealing with this. But more broadly, beyond that sort of particular controversy, again, he wrote a very good piece, but I think that I want, and correct me if I'm wrong, I want to connect this with perhaps some of your work around manufacturing consent and a sort of substantive view of freedom of speech, because it seems to me right now that one, it's sort of fallen out of favor amongst some on the left. And I actually think more ominously, I prefer to just have that actual debate with people. But some have sort of reverted to a very narrow libertarian position, which is that if the state isn't mandating something, then it's not an issue. So then we don't have to worry about, as an example, media monopolies or openness on tech platforms, as an example. Of course, you can hold up these atrocious examples of all sorts of obscene and bigoted people taking advantage of these platforms. But at the same time, we know that the sort of overall arc of sort of controlling these things will have implications for, as an example, investigating U.S. foreign policy or something like that. So anyways, I'm giving you a lot of a preamble here, but I'd like your thoughts on how you relate to the question of speech, and in fact, even when it's quite controversial, and why you hold it, I guess, as both a political and moral principle, if I read you correctly.
First of all, we should think a little bit, as you pointed out before, about the history. Why is this issue arising now? Is it new? No, it's the norm for decades, but it was always targeted against the left, so nobody paid attention to it. Way beyond anything that's happening now.
Right.
I mean, I'll just give you personal experiences. Others have far worse ones. Meetings broken up, violently disrupted, talks canceled, just books destroyed. So, for example, the first book that you mentioned, Manufacturing Consent, first book that Ed Herman and I wrote together was early 70s. The book was published by a very successful publisher. 20,000 copies were printed. The publisher was owned by a big major corporation, mega corporation. And one of the executives in the corporation saw the ads and didn't like it and wanted to look at the book, was horrified, and demanded that the publisher withdraw it from publication. And when they used, he destroyed the entire publisher, all of its books, all of its stock was destroyed, all the books, to prevent it from distributing a book of ours. Did anybody care? Actually, out of curiosity, I brought it to the attention of leading civil libertarians like Nat Hentoff and the ACLU, but they didn't see any problem. It's not state censorship. If a corporation decides to destroy a publisher and destroy all its stock to keep some book from appearing, what's wrong with that? In fact, it was hard to find. Ben Bakdickian was about the one person who found something wrong with this. But that's not the only time. I could give you other cases of mine where books were withdrawn from publication and I was asked to return the advance because it had some political content that the publisher didn't like. Other people have been fired, faculty positions eliminated and so on. Nobody cared. That wasn't censorship. It was directed against the left, vastly beyond anything that's going on today. Now that doesn't justify what's going on today. First of all, I really wouldn't call it the left. So when the New York Times withdraws an op-ed, which I don't think they should have done, it's pretty hard to call that the left. When a lot of young people decide to deplatform some speaker, I think they're making a bad mistake, even from a tactical point of view. There are much better ways to deal with it. Like you can run a counter session where you expose what's going on and use it as an educational opportunity. A lot of things can be done. So I think it's wrong in principle, and it's tactically wrong. Like it's a gift to the far right. They love it. But
and the platforms.
But we should bear in that it's a very small part of what has been the norm for as long back as you want to go. It's now targeting people who are considered respectable in mainstream. So it's a problem. But we should be quite aware of what's going on. But yes, it's the wrong thing to do, and we should try to stop it.
And thank you. And really just underlying that delineation that just because it's happening in the private sector does not mean that it's not an enormous threat. Particularly to the left, obviously.
It's always nice to see Michael. But Yeah, I do think Sam Cedar has a good take on this. The young Noam Chomsky, because he looks so much like him. But he always talks about, like, as opposed to shutting down the thing, ask questions. Like, why won't you debate Sam Cedar or something like that? Put the spotlight back on them, and basically like take away their rob them of whatever it is that drew the audience there in the first place.
Yeah, no, I think that is 1,000% correct. I think that that is always a better option, right? Do the having instead of trying to disrupt someone, which only, I mean, at best you've set a precedent that's not going to be good for you, right? At worst, you've added a little free publicity to people who often live off that, right? I mean, that's like 99% of their marketing is how dangerous they are and how people are afraid of them. But don't do that, right? Go to the Q&A and ask why won't you debate Sam Cedar or whatever. I think
Or
that's
Ben Burgis. Ben Burgis would like to debate all these people.
sure.
I've heard such rumors.
He would very much like to debate every single one of them. But yeah, I think that's exactly right. Young Kale, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I can't help but think, when I'm looking at these numbers, I mean, like, if people haven't read the article, they should. I mean, the New York Times editorial piece, obviously, if you're like a decent thinking human being, you understand, like, yes, it's padded with ideological stuff. It's a lot of like fluffy, it's the New York Times. That's just, it comes with the territory. That's fine. Just like skim through that. You get two things. One, like, there's actually like a fairly principled case saying, we should actually have free speech, that like it should be a human right. It should, at least minimally, a national right. It should be a human right. I don't know if they're saying human right, but they're certainly saying it should be like something within the US that people have the right to do. And I think we can at least minimally support that. But also the data is like pretty shocking, where it's some of these numbers. I mean, I'm not going to go through all of it right now, but just that, like, majority of people, in a number of different ways have felt like, again, if the poll is to be believed, like, most Americans in a number of different ways feel that, like, canceling is something that affects them, that they feel like they can't speak freely, that they don't have in actuality the right to freedom of speech anymore. I mean, that's like fairly, I mean, I think it was something like 34% of people affirmatively responded that people have freedom of speech in this country. It's like, it's a pretty massive degeneration. And obviously, I think, like, when we compare, we're doing a little whataboutism, and we compare like the Ukrainian situation with Iraq, I do think, like, in some ways, we have far greater kind of, as far as like public kind of policing of one another, and of not even just policing, but like actual, like, what is like of acceptable, loud public discourse on what's going on. Things are better now than they were under Iraq. I think that's true. At the same time, things have obviously degenerated. And I have to think about the fact that, like, historically, the reasons why most people got any of these rights at all, always and everywhere, came through the labor movement. It came through working people. Now, obviously, it was a coalition with like middle-class liberals and professionals, people like the people in the New York Times, and not to predict the future, but like, that's something where, like, when the New York Times is in favor of freedom of speech, like, we should say, great, you're on our side. We're in coalition on this, that, we want to push for this thing together. And it's better to have a bigger coalition when it's clearly the right political stance or the right principle. And politics is messy, but that's what it is. Coalitions are messy. You deal with that over the course of political struggle. But I think it necessarily, when you have an ally that is on your side, great. But what we need for the left, ultimately remains, we need institutions, we need unions, parties, various kind of labor confederations and associations and councils that represent and fight for working class interests, that can, in fact, push for greater expansion of things like this, like being able to say what you want to say in society and have the right to not be punished immediately for a bad thought.
No, exactly. And I think that you did anticipate a little bit what I was going to say, which is just that, that's appalling that, that many, whatever percentage of people it is, say that they're worried they can't say what they want to say, etc. One of the best solutions to that is having more unionized workplaces, so people are less afraid of being fired, because it's like it's like the line in Goodfellas about being a made guy, right? They can still whack you, but you need to sit down with good reason. That they that there has to just giving people some kind of due process. Which is what you get from unionization. So you can't be fired arbitrarily without that being without a justification. And you have some sort of way of fighting back against unjust termination is absolutely a huge part of the solution to this problem. And it's one of many reasons I think the left should own this issue and not just kind of like react to right-wingers who might try to weaponize it for their own purposes by having kind of a Pavlovian reaction to anybody who seems to be giving their narrative some kind of credence, and just doing the thing that I see so many people doing all day every day, which is taking positions not because they're applications of their own normative principles, their applications of their own analysis of how the world works, but they're just taking positions because it's a way of owning people who annoy them. And again, I don't, just do what you got to do with that city council open input, but that is, you got to get it out of your system some other way. Like, this is just not a healthy way to go through to approach politics. You should be saying, okay, I've got socialist values, I've got a materialist analysis of how the world works, how do I work forward from this, not how do I work backwards from whatever emotional catharsis I get out of saying the opposite of whatever the people who are most irritated me today say. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the Patreon-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the Patreon-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.